Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. My name is Kieran Stevens, and I'm also joined by my colleague, Nicola Pinocci, today. So on behalf of Williams Medical, I'd just like to take this opportunity to welcome everyone to this webinar on clinical waste management. This webinar is presented in partnership with Vernacare, and we're delighted to welcome Jenna Davis and Clive Spooner from Vernacare today. So yeah, thanks very much for joining us this afternoon, both. Just a couple of bits in terms of housekeeping. So this webinar is scheduled for 1 hour, but that will include plenty of time for questions at the end of the session. In terms of questions, so we'd like to invite your comments and questions throughout the session. So if you do have a question, please use the chat function on your screen. And one final note, so this session will be recorded and will be available following the webinar, along with some useful materials from the session. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Jenna and Clive to start the session.
Thank you. So hello, welcome, croeso. This is our CPD certified webinar, all about how our sharp safe products keep patients safe and have been doing so since 1979. So at Vernacare, we're incredibly passionate about minimising the risk of sharps injuries for our customers and their patients, which I hope comes across in this webinar today. This is just one of 12 CPD courses that we have available on our Vernacare Academy. So just to introduce myself, so I'm Jenna and I'm the Global Product Manager for Clinical Waste Management at Vernacare, so that I look after the Sharp Safe and Clinically Safe brands. And joining me today is Clive Spooner, who is our Global Training Manager, and Clive will give you a little product demonstration around the halfway mark of the webinar. So in this webinar today, I'm going to cover off the purpose of a sharps container. I think sometimes we can take health and safety pieces of equipment for granted, but they are very much needed there to keep you safe. The risks of an unsafe sharps container or an unsafe sharps practice. We've got some tips today on reducing needle stick injuries. And because I'm a bit of a nerd when it comes to accreditations, we're just going to touch on the important accreditations you need to ensure that your containers have. And then finally, I'm just going to breeze over the single-use sharps container and why that's so essential, in our opinion, for breaking the chain of infection. So because this is a CPD accredited webinar, I'm just going to highlight the objectives for today. So this is very much a back to basics webinar. It's not designed to patronize you in any way, shape or form, but some of you will be completely new to our products. So I just want to take you right back to the beginning, a very basic knowledge of sharps containers, their purpose and why they're vital in providing safety for you as healthcare professionals. We're here to educate you today, so we want to make you aware of the accreditations for sharps containers and why they're so important for patient and healthcare worker safety. And then we're also here to encourage you to challenge. We want to empower you to challenge clinical practice within your facility if you think a procedure might not be correct. So I'm just going to jump straight into the first part of this webinar, which is what is the purpose of a sharps container? So a sharps container is a container or bin used to dispose of medicinal sharps and non-medicinal sharps as well, needles, scissors, syringes. So this one here looks very archaic compared to today's standards, but that there is a piece of history. That is the first ever, the purpose-designed single-use sharps container, which we actually pioneered and brought to market in 1979. So SharpSafe were the first ever purpose designed sharps container. Before that, they were not in these highly engineered plastic containers that you see today. And the purpose of them was to mitigate the risk of sharps injuries for healthcare professionals and their patients. So globally, needle stick and sharps injuries are among the most common occupational hazard for healthcare workers, and we want to minimise this risk as much as possible through a range of containers suitable for most healthcare settings. So before we begin, I'd just like to explain what a sharps injury is. So it's an incident which causes a needle, blade such as a scalpel, or any medical instrument to penetrate the skin. It can happen with a clean sharp, so before it has touched the patient or before you've carried out a procedure, but the risk occurs when the sharp has been used on the patient and the injury happens post-procedure. Sharps injuries are a prevalent issue within healthcare, and it is estimated that one injury takes place every 10 seconds in the USA, which totals around 800,000 injuries a year, according to the CDC. In the UK, 6 out of 10 nurses have experienced a sharps injury, which was highlighted in a 2020 survey by the Royal College of Nursing. 94% of practicing UK surgeons have either personally been affected by a needle stick injury or have seen a colleague experience one. And then finally, the World Health Organization estimate that 2 million injuries happen every single year. And we believe that that figure would increase if all injuries were actually accurately reported. The financial costs of needle stick injuries are significant. So just using the NHS as an example, and this is just NHS England, by the way, a sharps injury costs around £500,000 per trust every year, which in NHS England is around £127 million annually. So it has quite a significant financial repercussion. But there are also a lot of risks to the individual that experiences a sharps injury, and I've just highlighted some here on this slide. Obviously, the first thing that goes to mind is bloodborne viruses, but there's also a lot of psychological effects as well, which I'm just going to go into. So sharps injuries can occur for many reasons. Inexperience, lack of familiarity, and equipment are often cited as the top 3 most likely reasons a sharps injury will occur. But what are the risks? Which is I just said. So we talk about, the risk of bloodborne pathogens, which have lifelong implications. There's also a risk that you may contract a new kind of highly contagious virus. So monkeypox was actually reported to have transmitted through a needle stick injury last year. But many studies have also reported the psychological effects a sharps injury can have on the person that suffers it. So anxiety, stress, depression, and even PTSD. So impact of the injury, studies have shown, can last up to 2 years after the original incident, with people who've experienced them reporting flashbacks, embarrassment, loss of confidence, a sense of failure, a low mood, and feeling isolated. And these are not just, the odd few people. There are studies that suggest 12% of doctors and up to 37% of nurses that have experienced a needle stick injury have actually developed PTSD post-injury. I'm just going to circle back and talk about the bloodborne viruses, because obviously these are the ones that can have the lifelong implications. They're viruses that people can carry in their blood and can spread from one person to another. Most infections occur through exposure to blood from unsafe injection practices, unsafe healthcare, unscreened blood transfusions, injection drug use, and sexual practices that lead to the exposure of blood. Vaccinations is an administrative control in any risk assessments to lessen the risk of contracting a bloodborne virus should a needle stick injury occur. And vaccines continue to be the most effective way to prevent infectious diseases. So here I've just broken down how long these viruses can survive outside of the body and the transmission risks associated with those viruses as well. So HIV can survive for 3 days outside of the body and has a transmission risk of 0.3%. Hepatitis B can survive for up to 1 week outside the body and has a transmission risk of 31%. Hepatitis C can survive for up to 3 weeks outside the body and has a transmission risk of 3%. And I think someone just joined the webinar there. What a terrible time to join. Sorry. Reporting your sharps injury is an important step in ensuring you receive the correct advice and medical attention for lowering your risk and to prevent you contracting these viruses. So if you take one thing away from this webinar today, we really advocate that you report your sharps injury, even if it just is off a clean sharp or one that's post injury. Don't think, oh, I'm sure there's nothing in it. Always go through your practice processes because it's really vital to report those injuries. So mitigating the risk, and this is where I'm going to start introducing our sharp safe containers. So the number one purpose of our containers is to keep healthcare workers, patients and waste handlers safe from sharps injuries. And we believe that the sharps container is key in mitigating that risk of injury. So we've got this great training poster here that we're just developing, illustrating the top tips for minimizing your risk of sharps injuries. It's universal best practice to never resheath a needle. And if you have an uncapped needle, then dispose of it safely in a sharps container. The container has a lot of features designed to keep you safe from harm. So familiarize yourself with the line and the fill line and the label, and know that those should always be facing forward on your container. If they're not, and the container has been incorrectly assembled, we do recommend permanently closing that container and assembling a new one correctly. We also have near patient safe disposal accessories, so illustrated here in this tray. These are there to encourage you to help dispose of the sharps at the point of use. Remember, 1/3 of injuries actually happen during the disposal. So in disposing of that sharp straight away, you are lowering the risk of injury. Now, I know this seems like common sense, but this is based on feedback we've had. Please never place your hand inside the sharps container. Unlike other containers in the market, we do have additional safety features within the lid, including a safety shield, or in our larger sizes, protected access, which prevent hands from going inside the container. We've all heard horror stories about children placing their hands inside the container. So we have additional kind of features in there to stop that from ever happening. They're also there to help stop any contents from falling from inside the container should it be fall over or drop. So the safety shield will actually move with the sharp. So you should never have to place your hand inside and move the safety shield out the way. It's designed to just move once you place the sharp inside. And then finally, always use the temporary closure when not in use and do not overfill the container. These are the most common issues our key account managers spot on audits and are common issues with all sharps containers. Above the fill line is your safe space to prevent injury, so never fill above that line. So the key takeaways for reducing your risk of injury then: handle your needle appropriately, so always keep your finger behind the sharp. Don't miss your refresher training sessions, and I feel like I'm preaching to converted here because you all are, but they are an important part of any risk assessments. Familiarise yourself with your healthcare facility risk assessment. Don't assume all facilities have the same practices. They do vary. And then never travel with a sharp. Utilize our MPST system and dispose of it at the point of use. With all the best intentions in the world and with all the best practices, unfortunately, accidents will occur. So I just wanted to cover off what you should do if you do experience a sharps injury. First of all, remember you're not alone, because it is estimated that 2 million happen every single year. You will have a support network. There will be a risk assessment in place. There will be processes to assist you in the event of an injury, and always report any sharps injury. Hopefully it won't happen, but if it does, it's important that you react accordingly and always report your injury. So follow these steps. So encourage the wound to bleed immediately. Wash the wound thoroughly with soap and water. Dress the wound with a waterproof dressing, and then report the injury to your line manager, who will then complete the incident and risk report forms and advise whether you need to go to occupational health or A&E, depending on the severity of the risk. So as part of our Back to Basics objective, we wanted to illustrate the importance of sharps containers and why they are such an important tool in mitigating the risk of an injury. So I'm just going to start deep diving now into the Sharp Safe range. We describe them as groundbreaking grey containers. So they are the world's first full range of sustainable single-use containers. We have a full range, which I'll show you in a moment, from 0.2 to 30 litre. They have industry-leading safety features, which I will take you through in just a moment as well. They're engineered using up to 100% recycled material, which has resulted in a 94% reduction in carbon footprint when compared to a virgin plastic. They're compliant with all the necessary standards, so ISO 23907-1 2019, rolls off the tongue that one, and the UN 3291. And like I've said, we have a world-class training program available on the Vernacare Academy, 12 CPD courses across different segments of clinical waste management, infection prevention and surgical solutions. But there's also a range of instructions for use videos on there for all our containers and the accessories as well, which we're just in the process of rebranding. So they are looking very nice, if I do say so myself. So I'm just going to start with the geeky bit. So the certifications. Sharps containers should have the following accreditations as standard. So a Sharps container, if you are removing from your site at any point, should have UN 3291. This is the ADR legislation, which specifies the conditions that must be met by containers when transporting infectious or associated clinical waste by land. And then I've mentioned the ISO regulation. This defines the international standards to be met in terms of puncture resistance, drop resistance, and seal tightness. And our containers are tested by BSI, which gives our products the BSI kite mark in addition to the standards as well. And then we are audited annually on that to ensure that we continuously are meeting those high standards. I mentioned the full range of containers. So we have our pocket range from 0.2 to 0.6, a small range from 0.8 to 3 litre, a medium range, which includes our 4 and 7. We have a large range, which is 9 litre to 30. And then we have a specialist range, which vary in sizes that are specifically designed to help dispose of larger instruments, usually in theatres and things. You'll find these containers, but they are available. So our industry leading features then. So all our containers come with an in-mold label, which means it is virtually impossible to remove the label. We have a rectangle base designed to optimize capacity. What you find with a round container, there can be a lot of wasted space within that container as the contents piles up in the center. We have a very clear, identifiable fill line on the lid, and that lid has a additional safe space put into the lid to help prevent you from injury. Also, we have additional features within the lids, like I mentioned, the safety shield, which is a protective barrier to help prevent contents from spilling. Our bases are made from 100% recycled material. We have the integrated carry handle at the back of the containers, which is compatible with an accessory range across all sizes from 1.8 up to a high 9. And we have an incredibly easy to use temporary closure feature. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to stop sharing and I'm going to hand you over to Clive Spooner, who is going to take you through a little short product demo.
Thank you so very much, Jenna. Yeah, so mine's Clive Spooner. I'm the Vernacare Global Training Manager. So I'm going to go through a few of the features and benefits about what Jenna just covered. So here, for example, this is one of our 1.8 litre sizes. So what do we mean by an in-mould label? Well, quite simply, if you try really hard, you can't actually remove that label. It's during the manufacturing process. We have that down here in South Wales. It's moulded in during that process. So you don't actually have a sticky label, which is after manufacture stuck onto the product. Why do we want that? Well, if you actually often look at these sticky labels, you'll often find on the on the edges there's air bubbles. You know, you actually have areas whereby the adhesion is visible. It's all about not just preventing needle stick injuries, but stopping the spread of infections. And if you think about the setting that we have these containers, whether it be in a GP clinic, whether it be in a in a long-term care home, whether it be in a acute hospital, yeah, we don't want pathogens adhering to sticky surfaces, because then a product itself potentially can actually make this a infection risk in its own right. So that's why we don't have sticky labels. Yeah, it's an in-molded label. Though the label also tells you so much about everything, and we are very proud that we are a UK manager down here in South Wales in Blackwood, and the UN details there actually shows GB. You can see it's grey. So why is this base now coloured in grey? Yeah, historically we always think of sharp containers as yellow. If we go way back to 1979, when Vernacare Sharp Safe pioneered the first purpose designed sharps container, that was red. Yeah, the reason they're now grey is because this is 100% recycled material. In this base, there's no virgin plastic, and that is so important for everybody, because we all know the issues about climate change. We all understand the issues about overuse of plastics, but that's the narrative. There's an overuse of single-use virgin plastics. We're proud we have recycled material. So very simply, you have the label and we have a lid. When you're assembling these, you always line up. The easy to see fill line and the label should both be facing in the same direction. To assemble, quite simply, you just put a bit of pressure onto each corner and 4 clicks. That means each corner is now adhered. So that's it, simple as that. That is now attached to the base. And if you actually assemble them for use, you'd actually then fill in the actual date and your details. So there's actually an audit that this is the day this has been actually been assembled. We spoke a moment ago about the temporary closure. So this is the lid. You can actually see inside the lid, you have the aperture. If you wish to disengage a needle or scalpel, things like that, you actually do it through that aperture here. But very, very easy, nice big orifice, in the product goes. We actually have at the back here, the lid's clipped back at the moment. To do a temporary closure, you quite literally just close the lid and put a bit of pressure, 1 click. That is now in temporary closure mode, and that is always how you should leave a sharps container when it's not in use. Always close at temporary closure method. Yeah, so you're now going to actually be using it very simply, just little underneath the clip, open it up and it clips back. That's now ready for use. Dispose of your sharp inside of that, and again, once you've done that, close again, temporary closure. So once the actual sharps container then gets to the fill line that you've then got to do a permanent closure, it's a very simple, yeah, where you've got the 1 clip temporary closure, all you do, a little bit of pressure and there's a 2nd click. That now is permanently closed. what you should do then is just fill out the details, the date, who's actually done the permanent closure, and that is ready then for your waste partner to actually collect and take away. So we have a full range. You can see a lot of them behind me. I've worked needle stick prevention for a long time, and it's so important to have a fit for purpose sharp container at the point of disposal. And that's why Jenna mentioned earlier about our NPSD, near patient sharps disposal system. This is it. Very simply, you actually bring it to close to where you need to actually dispose of a sharp. So if you're given an intramuscular or subcutaneous injection, this is where you make sure you actually bring this as close as possible. Why do we do that? Because interestingly, if you're actually doing that type of, you're doing phlebotomy, intramuscular, subcutaneous, when you actually take the sharp out of the patient, a sharp's injury is actually likely to occur within a distance of 1 meter of the patient. So that's why it's so important to bring this as close as possible. So therefore, you actually take the sharp out and it goes straight into a container. This is the this is one of our 2 litre. Jenna did mention earlier, and I'm sure you can see inside, that's the safety guard inside there. That is the this lid here is the safe space. Yeah. So one of the questions we often do get asked is, okay, so you've got this safe space, yeah. Is that not space whereby you don't actually you're overfilling? Yeah, no, not at all, because it's a legal requirement, the percentage of where that actually has to be. So that is not a wasted space. That is a legal requirement. It's there. So that's really important. So waste segregation. So if you're in England or Wales, we have to adhere to HTMO 701. If you're in Scotland, it's SHTN3. That is actually how we categorize waste. So we have yellow lids, you have the orange lid, you have the psychotoxic purple lid, we have a blue pharma lid, we also have red lid. So it's the lid which is the waste segregation. That's really key. But the base is ambidextrous. You always keep the same base because that label does not actually signify yellow clinical waste, orange clinical waste. So it actually saves you a lot of storage because the fact you've maybe using an incumbent supplier whereby you actually have to have a coloured lid specific. That's a colour base. No, with us, the containers are actually always the same. It's the lid which you stick on it, which is the difference. So we have the full range. All of them here are actually designed with these easy to use labels, very easy to assemble, very easy to put together. The only one which is the exception is a blue pharma container that has a bespoke blue pharma label. That's because it's also an additional UN certification for that one. But yeah, what we have here is a very easy, simple to use whole range which actually really do stop the risk of needle stick injuries. As we said earlier, that's the why are we here? We're here to actually protect colleagues, to make sure they're working safe. Needle stick injuries are an accident. No one deliberately sticks themselves, but it's so important to make this purpose. You've got something really does actually stop the risk. I'm going to pass over now to Jenna, but I'll be available at the end to answer any questions. Thanks very much, Jenna.
Okay, so Clive mentioned the safe space within our lids. Now, this is a very different design to other containers within the market. If you have a round container, they tend to have a very small flat lid. It could look like our space is wasted. However, it is mandatory under the ISO regulation that 15% is kept there as a safety space. So like I said, we don't call it wasted space, it is safe space within that container, and it's there to ensure that if you're placing a sharp into the container, your hand is nowhere near the nearest sharp. And because we have this built into our lids, it means that the full base can be filled, so it maximizes the capacity of the containers as well. And Clive touched on the in-mold labels. So we're the only container in the UK to actually have an in-mold label. They are molded to the base of the container during manufacture, meaning that they are virtually impossible to remove. And I always say virtually impossible as a disclaimer because I'm a mum of 5, so they see that as a challenge, but we've given it a good go, and it's really difficult to make any kind of dent on that container label. So the benefits of this means that the vital safety information always remains intact and can be read. You have a permanent audit trail that will always be visible, and labels are very easy to write on, which means you won't be failing, any EA audits and things because you can permanently have that audit trail. And unlike self-adhesive labels, they will never bubble or tear, and they are better for infection control. So I think we've talked quite heavily about this, but 1/3 of sharps injuries occurs during disposal. So we advocate using a near patient safe disposal accessory with your sharps container. This was another world first for us, so we're incredibly proud of the system. It's a range consisting of trays, stands, brackets, trolleys, and it means that our range can adapt to most healthcare settings. Sharps containers can be taken to the point of use, and it removes the choice between leaving a sharp by a patient or carrying that sharp to the bin. It removes the risk of loose sharps being left by a patient's bed, all the horror stories that we've heard previously when bad practices were in, commonplace. And injuries carrying a sharp are more common than you think, so always plan your disposal before you carry out the procedure. And then we have the protected access feature, which is an additional safety feature designed purely to prevent hands from entering the containers. So I'll admit that the container aperture on a size 9 litre to a 30 litre is quite wide. It's purpose designed that way so you can fit the larger instruments into them without needing the taller, more specialised range. So even the most vigilant of parent can't watch their child 100% of the time. So, and kids can get curious, and they're brightly coloured. So they're, a massive hazard for children. So having this protected access feature in place is so ideal for high usage areas, or areas predominantly used by children, because it's that extra peace of mind to keep people safe. So when you combine this protected access feature with the angled aperture and the safe space within the lid, we are proud of these features because they help protect child patients from accidental sharps injuries. The rotating plastic shield completely prohibits hands from entering the container, and also prevents the contents from being spilled or removed. And finally, on our sharps containers, this is probably something that we are the most proud of. Vernacare are incredibly passionate about sustainability, and even though we are single use, we are manufactured in a way that means we are as sustainable as possible. So our sharps containers are manufactured using up to 100% recycled material in the base, hence the darker grey colour. Should we have kept a lower percentage of recycled content, it would have gone like a murky yellowy colour. So we just made the decision to transition everything to the darker grey. But it wasn't just because we liked the colour grey. It did give us a 94% lower carbon footprint than when compared to that yellow colour. So we've made a compromise on the colour, but it's better for the environment. And we've been able to remove 4,600 tonnes of virgin plastic from entering the supply chain in our first year. So it was, quite a step forward for single-use containers, really. And I really feel like we're leading the way on this. So just a question for you. You don't have to answer, but you can pop it in the chat. Do you know if your container is ISO approved? So this is actually really important because there are some containers that are slipping into the market that don't actually have the up-to-date standards under the guise that they're more sustainable. So this is something that you do need to be more aware of, especially for your patients and your staff members as well. you need to use an ISO approved container. It is, important for your own risk assessments. So I know that I've touched on the ISO previously, but I'm just going to recap on this. It's not a mandatory standard, but it does outline the minimum recommendations for a sharps container, and it is recognised internationally, and it is incredibly thorough with what it's covered. The point of the ISO is making excellence habit, and that's what they really try to encourage with this standard for sharps containers. So it covers everything from puncture resistance, drop resistance, a capacity limitation on the 85%, a temporary and permanent closure for the container. It has all sorts of labeling requirements. There's a training requirement, so each label must have instructions for use on it. And it also dictates some design functionality as well, so it must have a carry handle. And this is where the temporary closure has come in. It's mandated as one of their design functionalities. So part 1 is for single-use containers. Part 2 is for reusables. I'm not going to touch on that today because that is a different training all in itself, but there are 2 parts. So I just wanted to make you aware of that as well. If anyone ever says, oh, but it's not part 2, our containers don't need to be because they're not reusable. So newtons of force. So this is the puncture resistance of our containers. So I won't get too much into the science, but the force needed to penetrate test specimens shall be a minimum of 16 newtons and an average of 18 newtons or greater. So that is what is dictated within the standard. That means, so 18 newtons of force is equal to about 1.8 kilograms in weight. So that's how much pressure our containers can take. So if you are considering a container that doesn't have this ISO standard, please be advised that container punctures are more of a prevalent issue. And this is why you need to use a container that is ISO certified. So then just finally, if you've ever completed one of our courses on the Academy, you may recognise this slide, the chain of infection. We use it quite a lot because it is very important to our business. The chain of infection is how pathogens can spread from person to person. And we firmly believe that single-use equipment is vital in breaking that chain of infection. So our products are proudly single-use. They are designed to dispose of sharps and then the contents and their potential pathogens safely and permanently. If you want to learn more on this, there's courses on the Vernacare Academy as well. So just a little time for reflection then. I just want you to consider, have you ever looked at your sharps container before and considered the safety features within that container? Does it have a safe space? Have you familiarized yourself with the handle on that container? Do you know what information is on the label? These are the things that just make yourself more aware of the sharps container, because PPE and safety equipment tends to blend into the background sometimes. It's just part of the job, but it is vital and it's there to protect you. So definitely familiarize yourself with those containers. And then finally, just have a think after today, like, how are the sharps containers utilised within your practice? Are your procedures fit for purpose? Are they there to minimise the risks? Is there any additional accessories you could potentially introduce that would help have a safer practice and then minimise your risk within the facility? So just as we're wrapping up, I just wanted to review our objectives from the start of the webinar. So we've taken you back to basics. I'm getting tired now. And then the purpose of the sharps containers. We've talked about the risk of sharps injuries and what you should do in the event of an injury as well. We've definitely educated you on accreditations today, and highlighted the importance of this safety accreditation, and shown you the features on our sharps containers designed to help minimise the risk of injuries. And just there in the reflection, I set you a little challenge, reflect on your own practices and whether any changes need to be made. And we've definitely discussed the benefits of sharps containers and how they minimise the risk of injury as well. So just to summarise, a sharp-safe container has been purposely designed and has industry-leading features that minimise the risks of injuries. And then finally, stay up to date with your training, familiarise yourself with sharps best practice within your facility, and always use your sharps containers correctly. Make sure the line and label are always facing forward when you've assembled your container, and always use that temporary closure when not in use. So I think I'm going to hand back over to Kieran now.
Okay, so I'm sure you'll agree, everyone, some great insight there. So thank you very much to Jenna and Clive. So we have an opportunity now to cover some questions. So please pop them in the chat now. I can see Clive's already answered some questions in the chat as we've gone along. So maybe we can revisit those just while, if anyone else has got any questions, just for everyone on the call. So we had a question from Julie. So how do I access the Vernacare Academy?
Yeah, thank you very much. That's a www.vernacareacademy.com, and when you go onto there, you just use your business email address and you actually just enter the organisation you're from. It gives you free access to a whole range of 12 CPD accredited courses, but also a lot of training courses on the complete Vernacare range within not just clinical waste management, surgical solutions and infection prevention.
Great, thank you, Clive. And then we had a question from Anne-Marie. Has the 3-month disposable advice stopped now?
Really interesting question, isn't it? It's one that's open to debate because HCM 071 wasn't particularly clear on it, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I believe it's actually come from NICE guidance rather than HTM 701. It was referenced in the HWNA meeting this week where they were like, oh, this magic 3 months. I think it's just advocated as best practice. It's not mandated anyway. It's not legislation. We would just say that it's best practice to introduce a new container after 3 months to close it down and dispose of the contents. But it's, you know, it's up to your site really whether you maintain that practice or not.
Yeah, one of the things I would say with that, especially, is when you actually are closing a sharps container, ideally it's within a time frame. You're closing it within probably about a month, and it's reached its fill line. Yeah, if you've got a sharps container that potentially is you're having to close because it's not full after 3 months, then just have a think about. With the SharpSafe range, we've got an extensive range of different sizes, because it could be that you're actually having to close a container which is only at 15-20% capacity. That isn't good for any of us, because of course guidance is these go for incineration. We don't want fresh air going for incineration. So have a think about the sizes. Reach out to Williams Medical and to us at Vernacare about what we actually do the sizes, because that is also one of the things we do see when we're doing audits in facilities.
I guess it's come from, you know, if your container's there and it's just slowly filling up over time, it's not really used very often. There's a risk you're going to knock that over, and then, you know, you could have an issue. But, you know, yeah, if you are having one open for that long, you're probably using the wrong size.
Yeah.
And I guess a linked comment there from Maria. So we have been told recently that the bins do not need to be closed after 3 months, but to move the bins to busier rooms to ensure that they can be filled quicker.
Yeah. In temporary closure, obviously.
Okay, we have another question. Can I ask if you have an audit form that you can?
Yeah, I mean, we can speak to our own sales team. We'll have something that we'll share through Kieran and Nicola. We'll share that with you, then you can dissipate that through. But yeah, we do have our own internal audit forms that we support the NHS with, so we can actually sort of
it's quite a nice takeaway for us actually to look into that.
Yeah. Question really for Caroline there is, I think you're at a GP surgery, so we probably just need to have a think about what you actually do need within our current audit form you actually need within your GP surgery.
Okay, I think that might be it for the questions.
Okay, great. And just myself and Nicola were sort of discussing. We were intrigued as to how the red box and container that you shared at the start of the session had developed to where you are now. But yeah, you guys covered that brilliantly throughout the session. So thank you for that. Okay, I don't think we have any other questions. Oh, there we go. We have one more in from Anita. So, how do we find out who is our infection control lead?
That's a very good question that we wouldn't be able to actually answer that for you, but it's important, because if you're within a NHS surgery, then you should be able to go onto your trust website and identify who the infection prevention link nurse as well as the head of infection prevention is. If you're actually working in a private surgery, then that's a question really sort of like occupational health should be able to give you that advice and guidance. But yeah, your manager, I think Maria says your manager should know. So
say always go to your line manager.
Yeah,
That's what I would do. Make it her problem. I can say that because she's not on this call.
Okay, I'll just give another couple of seconds for anyone else to ask any other questions.
If anyone does have any questions that they think of, you can reach out to us through Nicola and Kieran anyway, and we're always here to answer any questions on the products.
Okay, so just from our perspective, I want to take this opportunity to thank Jen and Clive from Vernacare once again for joining us this afternoon. So as one of the leading partners for healthcare professionals in primary care, we are dedicated to supporting your everyday, both from a service perspective and also through added value and education, as we've been able to deliver in partnership with Vernacare today. From a Williams medical perspective, our offering spans across numerous medical services, along with thousands of products in our disposables, pharmaceutical and equipment categories. We're very proud of our excellent rating on Trustpilot, and just want to reiterate that we're here to support you and help you save time and effort through our omni-channel shopping experience. So I'll now pass you over to Nicola to close the session.
Thank you. Hi, so if you'd like to purchase any of the containers, we range sizes from 0.6 litres all the way up to the 30 litres. These can be bought on our website or by giving us a call. Just a reminder, over the next week you will receive your CPD certificate along with some more information on the containers. That will be sent out in the post to you. Thank you all for joining and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone. Stay safe.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.